world-class art and how retaining and reusing this existing fabric in any context can have a formative part in placemaking. I'll start with the Momentary project that is located in Bentonville, Arkansas, as Rachel mentioned. And then I have three other projects that I'll move through a little bit more quickly. All three of those are located in the city of Chicago, and that's the Chicago Children's Theater, Looking Glass Theater, and the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture. Usually when I start my presentations about the Momentary project, I go through a series of slides about Arkansas and Bentonville and where Bentonville is located and the history of the city, but I'm going to skip all that today because I'm guessing everyone already knows the history and the region. But I will just start by kind of looking at the building that is now the Momentary and how it was the state it was in, I should say, whenever we were brought on board. So the former Kraft plant located here on E Street in Bentonville. This is an aerial view that was taken right before we started our design process. You can see that the 8th Street Market, where the former Tyson plant was just starting construction. And then we have a lot of empty space around the Momentary building, which has now been more developed. This is the view of the building when looking from the north, and this is the view of the building when looking from E Street. The building had been abandoned for just a few years by the time we were brought in, and we were able to do a lot of analysis of the existing building, including scanning it with to create a point cloud, lots of aerial images, and then just site walks and getting familiar with the building ourselves. You can see that there's a lot of different types of construction that were present in the building, and those were the result of several different building campaigns that had been completed over time. We were able to go back by looking at historic aerials and historic Sanborn maps to kind of determine how the building had grown over time, almost in an organic way. Starting with the version on the left, which was much more compact. That was the original plant that was constructed in 1947. And then every 10 to 20 years, there was additions made to the building to accommodate changing processes that were happening within the factory or maybe expansion of what they were producing. So what started as a building that was literally making cheese ended up as a building that was producing something called cultured cheese concentrate. And the fermentation process was sped up quite a bit over time to create what we all know as Kraft macaroni and cheese, the orange powder that goes in there. So we were interested in the way that the building had grown over time. Like I said, it felt like it was almost organic and it was kind of sprouting these limbs and wings over time that were just kind of expanding their presence on the site and taking over more of the property. I should say that, there was a conversation when we were first brought on board on this project about if the building was worth keeping. And I think that's an important question to ask anytime we're brought on to do an adaptive reuse project, and an important question that any client needs to ask themselves. In this case, if we were only looking at it with regards to the cost, the answer probably would have been no. It would not have been worth keeping purely to save money. A lot of times the answer is yes, and that's the reason why a lot of nonprofit organizations that we work with choose to adaptively reuse an existing building. But in this case, because of the state of the building, because the way that it was constructed, which was very economical at the time of each of these building campaigns, the quality, I would say, of the materials that were left in place, and also just the compatibility of the existing space and what we were trying to put into it, which with, art museums and performance spaces, there's a lot of technology and acoustic, spatial requirements that you have to consider. And sometimes those can be really difficult to retrofit in these existing spaces. So if it came down to the cost question, I think the answer would have been no. However, the building had a contextual tie to the history of the town. It was also, familiar to the people in Bentonville, and it provided a lot of unique spaces within the interior that you would have never designed if you were starting from scratch. But there was something about the quality of a found space as a backdrop for contemporary art that really spoke to the client and to us as well. And it was decided that we would work to overcome kind of the compatibility challenges as well as accessibility challenges in order to make this space work as the momentary. This is an example of an accessibility challenge. This was a loading dock. So you can see that one end of the room is about 3.5 feet higher than the other end of the room. The stairs are not ADA. Nothing about this was ever designed for people to be occupying it. It was designed for equipment and trucks. And so there was a lot of accessibility issues that we needed to work through in order to make this a public space. All the different spaces on the interior were different, reflecting the different construction type and time period that they were built. So this is the original plant here. You can see quarry tile floors, pretty aggressive slope on the floors to drain water that was used in the processes that went on here. We have the glazed block wall, steel overhead roof structure, and then you can see kind of beyond that the building starts to open up. We get these CMU walls, steel structure, metal deck overhead. So this was the kind of the part of the building that was added on in the 80s. And it just kind of continued to grow organically from there. When we were looking at how to modify the existing building, we took our cues from the way that the building had been modified already in the past. So like I showed the first version, 5 versions of the building before, we kind of referred to our interventions here as version 6 and described how we would be making additions to now support the new processes and activities that were going on within the space in a similar way that the building additions had been kind of tacked on to the building in the past. So built of contemporary materials that were popular at the time of construction, clearly different and clearly an intervention compared to what was there before, and only placed in order to support new program that needed to be accommodated. And we always kind of presented this idea that we weren't the last, this wasn't the last version, but that the momentary would be a living building that would continue to grow and adapt over time as their processes changed. So this is an aerial view from the southeast corner, and this is a drawing from the same direction, kind of illustrating what we reduced down to 4 key interventions that we needed in order to accommodate the new program of the building. I'll move through these somewhat quickly. The first intervention was the addition to the loading docks. This is located on the far north side of the building. This is kind of dual purpose as building and signage. And it obviously takes cues from the trucks that used to be pulling up to the loading dock all the time. This is where the final product would have been loaded onto the trucks and taken to another factory to be made into the final product. So we really wanted to design a structure that looked like it could be impermanent, very light, and almost like it might move over time. We incorporated a frit pattern on all of the new additions. I should say all of the new additions are created from glass and steel. Like I said, contemporary materials in contrast to what was there before. And we worked with Addie Roanhorse, an Osage American artist, to design a frit pattern that was then modified and applied to 3 of the additions to create different effects on the glass, this one being a gradient to provide some privacy for anyone working at desk height, but then openness to have some visibility through and from inside to out. The second addition is the tower bar. So that's located on top of the existing 70-foot fermentation building. This one, certainly, if it came down to cost, could have been built for a lot less if you put it on the ground. But again, we're kind of taking found structures and seeing what we could do that you might not do otherwise if you were starting from scratch. And so this this structure is kind of perched on top of the existing building, slightly rotated, again, almost like it just got set there by someone and is kind of enclosing the rooftop space that we were able to access and give a 360 degree view of the city. The third is the vertical circulation tower. So this is the structure that contains both of our exit stairs that provide exiting for the tower bar, as well as all of the other floor levels from there down to the ground. It also contains an elevator and a material lift. So all of the new vertical circulation for the building is enclosed within this addition. This was built entirely of cast-in-place concrete because, well, for two reasons. One is we needed a very stiff structure in order to tie in the existing structure at every level in order to provide lateral stability that was completely missing from the design of the tower itself previously. And the other is we have two exit stairs that are kind of intertwining within this tower, almost like a DNA strand. And so those needed to be completely separated in terms of a fire separation. So everything was cast in place with concrete and then clad in this glass rain screen that incorporates a different version of Addie Roanhorse's frit pattern that can be used for projection and for backlighting. There's 4 different opacities of the glass panel that kind of go from more opaque at the bottom to less opaque at the top. And the 4th addition is the main entry. So this is primarily for circulation. This is located within that area that I showed before with the loading dock and the little yellow stair. There was no real way to easily access from one side of the building to the other, and there was no way to access a clear way to access from the south part of the site to the north. So by demolishing a very small portion of the building and inserting this glass room, we were able to completely connect from north to south and from east to west. Again, a third version of Addie's art on the glass. On the interior of the building, our charge was to try to keep as many qualities of the existing building as we could. So you can see on some of these before and afters how we were able to maintain existing materials, existing structure, creating new wall openings, incorporating new systems, so all new HVAC systems, all new lighting, all new plumbing, and then also circulation. So on the right, we have kind of a monumental stair, as well as a new ADA accessible ramp, getting everyone from one level to the next. We had to look closely at the floor in all the spaces as well, because like I said, a lot of these spaces were sloped pretty significantly for drainage. So there's some areas where there had to be some modifications made to the floor in order to make them accessible. We also incorporated a few new art walls within the building, but all of those were almost conceived of as a canvas that was hung on the wall. So they're held away from the floor, held away from the roof structure, and held away from the ends of the wall on either end. Again, to kind of still showcase all of the existing materials and have the new interventions feel like something that could be temporary or could be removed at any time. You can see that some of the spaces were modified. This space here on the left has some enclosed rooms that were used as control rooms when this was a factory. So we were able to strip those down to only leave the structure and actually cut back that mezzanine a little bit to create a larger space, as you can see on the right, in order to accommodate large scale works of art within the building. So there was a lot of coordination with the curatorial team as well as the artists that were lined up to do the first few shows to figure out how we could make as few modifications as possible in order to accommodate the art that was planned to be shown in the space. It's just some examples of the artwork shown in different types of spaces. Again, you can see this is a precast structure. There was a lot of different types of spaces. This is a concrete masonry part of the building. So as you walk through, you can still read all of those original materials and construction methods that were present. And then actually providing occupiable space within the 70-foot tall fermentation space that's kind of called the tower in the building. This was a relic where there used to be a really tall tank that had been removed. There was a pad on the floor, which you can see here is the red circle. There was like this rust stain on the floor. And then as you look up, there was this void where it had been located. It had already been salvaged by the time we visited the building, but we were really interested in kind of the void that it left behind. And so that was something that we wanted to continue up into our new addition on the roof. And that resulted in the glass circle on the floor and then the skylight above. So taking that found condition of the void and extending that all the way through the new addition. And within these new additions, again, we wanted the experience to be completely different from what you found in the existing building. So while you're experiencing the rawness of the industrial building below, then you come up to actually occupy one of these glass boxes and you feel what it would feel like to be in one of those new contemporary glass and steel structures. So the difference in the experience was very intentional. This is kind of another example of how technology in theater is not extremely compatible with some of these existing structures. For this built part of the building, this is the roadhouse. There was conversations like, should this just be an addition in and of itself? Like, do we just build a theater from scratch? Is it too difficult to try to retrofit this existing structure in order to make theater work in the space? But ultimately, having it within the existing building was the most important part, and looking for opportunities, not just challenges, in retrofitting a space like this into a theater was what kind of drove the design. So we were able to excavate the floor to provide movable floor panels. Again, lots of coordination and figuring out how to do that without undermining the existing foundations. We left the roof in place, so everything had to fit with below that precast roof deck overhead. We were able to use a lot of the void spaces within those double Ts to run all of our systems and mechanical systems and things like that. But a lot of really close coordination in order to make something like that work. This is the roadhouse being used, and some views of the space from the green. So this example, I think, is a good one because building fabric like existed in the original structure is not uncommon in the U.S. and not just in Arkansas. Like you can find buildings like this everywhere. And I think a lot of times the first instinct for anyone is to get rid of it, knock it down, and start from scratch. But I do think by challenging that preconceived notion and keeping these spaces, there's a lot of really unique opportunities that can come along with that, and a lot of found conditions that can make a space richer than it would have been had you just kind of started over and started with a clean slate. So, while both types of projects are really interesting and fun to work on, I think it is an extra challenge sometimes to think about it from that perspective, and sometimes it can result in a richer end product. The second one I'm going to talk about is the Chicago Children's Theater. So this building was built the exact same year as the original Momentary building, which was 1947. This was a Chicago police station. This building is located in Chicago's West Loop neighborhood. And when the Children's Theater was looking for a home, this building had been abandoned, and the city was able to sell it to my client for $1. So they were able to get their hands on an existing building and acquire a couple of grants from the state of Illinois to convert it into their first permanent space. So a severely budget restrained project, but really impactful. This is, like I said, it's their first permanent home. And so we really wanted to do everything we could to give them a great space to kind of to start out with. There were some requirements tied to the grant funding, and we did have to be LEED silver or higher for the project. So that made the budget constraints that we started with even tighter. This is what the building looked like when we first were brought on board. It had only been abandoned for about a year, but one freeze-thaw cycle in Chicago can do this to your paint. So this is what it looked like, almost a little haunted house-ish when we did our first walkthrough. There was a lot of glazed brick in the building. You can see on the left, the holding cells were still left in place. There was some concrete structure and then a lot of plaster. The existing garage that was on the west part of the site was not structurally sound, and so that was elected to be demolished, but the remainder of the building was to be kept. It was 2 stories with a basement, pretty much a full basement. For this building, we determined that we needed to make 2 small additions to the structure. Those are noted as number 2 and 3 on the site plan here. Number 2 is just a new entry vestibule that is located at the end of a long ramp. So you can see the bottom of the ramp with the word up. This is a 1 to 20 slope ramp that would accommodate CPS or Chicago Public School classes of children. So the way that the theater functions is that a bus will drop off, 30, 40 kids at once. They all need to get off the bus and like safely line up outside, and then they're all brought inside together. And ideally, where they're lining up and being brought inside would be ADA accessible. So we added this new ramp along the back of the building so that everyone could line up safely off the street and away from traffic, and then all come in to that number 2 entry vestibule. And then the addition that's noted as number 3, that's vertical circulation. So that's our new elevator that's required to get any of those kids up to the 2nd floor or even down to the basement. This is a plan of the 1st floor. It was mostly stripped of all of the existing internal partitions. Only the structural partitions were kept. And then the space where the holding cells were located, which is number 11, is converted into their studio theater. They have a maximum capacity for their shows of 149 people, and everything's completely flexible within, it's kind of like a black box studio theater environment. The rest of the 1st floor is waiting room, lobby, admin, and support. Upstairs, again, we removed everything that wasn't structural and then we replaced it with 5 classrooms. So this is where they facilitate all of their programming, educational programming, and summer camps. And then in the basement, this is all support space, green room, dressing rooms. There was where number 2 is, that was a gun range with that was kind of this 4-sided concrete room. And so that ended up being the perfect proportions for wardrobe storage and laundry. We also incorporated bathrooms down here to support the performance space upstairs. And you can see where the number 5 is, that we did bring that elevator down into the basement. So that was a very costly endeavor, but something that was really important to the client because they do serve a lot of kids with special needs, and they wanted to make sure every bit of the building was completely accessible. So this is a before and after looking at the back. So on the right, you can see that new ramp that I described, and then the new additions where you enter the building. Some of the windows were enclosed because that is where the black box theater is located. But we kind of inset the brick in those so you could still read the patterning of the existing brick wall, and all the kids kind of line up along the ramp there before they come inside. Inside, everything's really raw, really flexible. Again, we had very minimal budget to work with regards to finishes. We kept the existing concrete floors and we exposed the existing roof structure. So concrete on the roof, concrete on the floor. We did incorporate some acoustic panels up within the concrete framing up above to provide some acoustic absorption throughout all of the spaces. This is upstairs, the hallway that gets you to all of the classrooms. We did need to provide new flooring upstairs because the condition of the existing floor was not adequate. So we, used some LVT to stay as close to budget as possible. And all of the systems running overhead were just left exposed here. This is in one of the classrooms. And this is the black box theater on the first floor. This is, I think, the last view. So again, this is where the existing garage had been removed and we added the new addition for the elevator. Chimney just no longer functional, but left in place. So yeah, again, this is a building type that's extremely common within the city of Chicago. This like blonde masonry brick buildings with concrete structure, very common in 30s and 40s construction. And so we actually see a lot of this in our projects. And just it's interesting to see the amount of intervention and how much of the existing building you leave exposed versus how much you try to cover up. The third project that I was going to review is for the Looking Glass Theater. This one is different from the first two because this is actually a historically significant structure. This is the historic waterworks building in the city of Chicago that was constructed actually before the Great Chicago Fire. So it's one of the only surviving buildings in the city from before the fire, therefore one of the oldest buildings in the city. Looking Glass Theater was given space within the building 20 years ago, and they constructed their theater at that time, but they had no street presence or street frontage for their space. They were kind of hidden within this existing building. The lobby, or the now lobby, was kind of shared between them and a few other different organizations. There was like a tourist or company where you could buy tickets to go on like tour buses throughout the city. There was a small Chicago Public Library area where you could pick up books from the library. There used to be a restaurant in here that served sandwiches, and then there was also the door to get you into the theater area. So it was kind of this shared space that wasn't really owned by anyone. And over time, it just felt very impermanent, and no one really knew what it was for. Um, right before COVID, the theater was able to expand their lease to take over this space, and so it would be for the first time fully dedicated to the theater space itself. This is a existing or a before plan showing the existing conditions. You can see their black box theater, which had already been located kind of within the building. Where the two is, that was their existing lobby. So again, really kind of concealed within the building itself. And then on the far right, this is that space that was shared by four different organizations that you kind of had to walk through in order to get into the theater. So when we were brought on, the project that we were brought on to do was to not only expand their lobby into this newly acquired space, but renovate their new and existing lobby to create a more seamless experience from the time you come off the street to where you go in the door to go into the theater itself. They also wanted to add a new bar and concession area. They wanted a more front-facing box office, and they wanted to improve the efficiency of their restrooms because they were dealing with really long lines at intermissions, specifically for their women's restroom. All of this was located within this historic structure, so we were not able to make any modifications to the exterior of the building. We did have to go through a landmarks review for the design, or I should say City of Chicago landmarks review. And there was a lot of existing structure within the building that we were not able to make modifications to, specifically the floor of this new lobby. So anything that we did needed to just work within all of the constraints of the existing structure and the existing building envelope. This was the first kind of concept that we put together, which was to kind of place this new core volume that's kind of spanned between the new lobby and the existing lobby. You can see there is a level change here. It's about 2 feet different in floor level from one side to the other. So you were never able to get from one side to the other directly. You kind of had to go around and take an elevator in another part of the building. So we wanted to be sure to include a ramp in our design. So this is how the design started to progress over time. We proposed that this new volume in the center of the space be constructed using an exposed pipe grid system to recall the design of within the interior of the theater itself. And then some type of warm tone translucent panel, which ultimately was decided to be fiberglass to kind of clad that volume so that it did feel like something that was added within the spaces. So it had a consistent feeling, a consistent reading from one section of the lobby to the other, but obviously something that was new and added here in our contemporary time period. For the flooring, we felt really strongly about proposing a terrazzo floor for a few different reasons. One is like I said, we couldn't make any modifications to the floor structure. The concrete slab elevated deck was very inconsistent, and we needed something that could be applied continuously throughout both levels of the space. And we wanted it to be continuous from floor to stair into the upper floor. So terrazzo was something that could be applied throughout, and it also has this feeling of permanence that we felt like the lobby had never had before, since it was always shared between all these different organizations. So providing something that gave it a more permanent ownership and elevated the finish of it a little bit was very important. Some additional renderings as you kind of make your way through the space. This is a rendered plan that's showing how we ultimately were able to resolve the program, provide new restrooms using existing plumbing locations, but kind of adding on to those. We weren't able to move any of the existing systems that were located within the building that served other parts of the building, so everything was kind of constrained around those. And we were able to ultimately tuck in the ramp kind of within that fiberglass volume and get you from one level to the next. So here's some finished photos of the project, showing the fiberglass and pipe grid volume and then the terrazzo floor. The new bar and concession area. There you can see the stair that connects from one level to the next and the terrazzo that kind of continues up from one level to the next as well. This is called Looking Glass Theater. The pattern in the terrazzo was kind of an abstracted take on a celestial map, kind of playing on that looking glass idea. So there is some, meaning behind it, but also we wanted some patterning in the terrazzo to kind of guide you from one part of the lobby to the next. We weren't able to increase that opening size between the lower lobby and the upper lobby, so that was maxed out at the dimension that you see here. So we really tried to use materiality on the floors, the ceiling, the walls, and then signage to get people to really feel like it was a continuous flow from one area to the other area. Some detail views of the intervention and the ramp. Entry from the adjacent waterworks space into the theater itself. And then this is the restroom volume. All right. And the last one I'll go through, this is actually a project that is currently in design. So this has not begun construction yet. We're hoping that it'll start construction in the fall. This is this is a national landmark as well as a Chicago landmark building. So this is the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture. This building was originally constructed as the Humboldt Park Stable Building and Refectory. So this building was converted into the art museum, again, I would say about 20 years ago, but they need additional space for programming. They have this large interior courtyard within the building that they currently have erected this temporary tent that you can kind of see peeking out in some of the photos. And it's not temporary because it's been there for about 10 years. And so they approached us instead to basically put a glass roof on the courtyard so that it would be converted into interior space. There are a lot of precedents for enclosing historic courtyards with glass roofs, but most of them are not surrounded by roofs that are designed like this one, with the steep slope roofs that are draining into the courtyard itself. So we did have to kind of modify our initial thinking into a design that would be able to accommodate all of the storm water and snow runoff from the existing roof on to the courtyard itself, while still creating and maximizing the amount of transparency that we could put into a glass roof to see the surrounding building. We're not able to put any structural load on this existing building, so you can see in this diagram here, the top kind of shows the final condition, and the bottom shows the structural strategy in order to make this work. So essentially, we have 8 columns that are located within the center of this space. Those are tied together by really large box beams that define the perimeter of the skylight. And the skylight then goes up and over the primary gable entry that connects the perimeter building into the courtyard itself. On 3 sides of the skylight, we have a flat roof area, and that's the transition area between the existing roof and our new skylight that collects all of the snow and storm water and provides place for all the drainage within the structure down to the below grade sewer. And that is fully cantilevered from those center box beams out to the existing building. So we're fully cantilevering the roof from the center so that no load is placed on the existing building. This area also has to accommodate any like scaffolding or maintenance materials that are required to maintain the existing brick masonry facade. So again, these are just renderings because like I said, we're not under construction yet, but you can see here the columns that are located on either side of this skylight. The box beams are concealed by a wood and plaster finishes. The plaster is um, the frieze, essentially, the vertical surface that wraps around three sides of the space. And that incorporates some Taino um, icons that were really important to be incorporated from the museum's perspective. You can see how the skylight encapsulates the gable that is the main entry into the courtyard from the existing building. The glass in the skylight has three different levels of opacity, with the most clear being at the bottom to provide the most view to the existing structure, including like the chimney, which you can see on the left there. And then more and more frit gets incorporated as you get up to the ridge because there's less of the existing building to view at that point. And also we're able to improve the um, uh, solar heat gain coefficient of the glass by providing additional frit, although all of the glass is fritted to be bird friendly. This is looking the opposite direction. We did incorporate a hip into the skylight to avoid the skylight being visible as much as possible from the outside of the building. So you can see that the roof on that side of the building is much lower. It's just a single story part of the structure. So if we did not have, if that was a gable glass end, you would really have a big presence of that gable end that you would be able to see from outside of the structure. So the hip really reduces that quite dramatically. The intention was for this to be as invisible as possible unless you're inside the space itself. This kind of shows you that transitional area. That's the flat roof between the skylight and the existing building. And we held that roof away from the existing structure so that you could fully see all of the woodwork on the existing building. And we're also providing lighting along the edge of that ceiling to kind of highlight all of that existing woodwork that's present here. And I think, yeah, I just have one detail showing that. So here on the left on the column line, you can see the large box beam. You can see the skylight spring point starts by sitting on that box beam. And then we have the structural cantilever that extends out over and just up to the existing roof. And then we are just very lightly tying in our new roofing membranes into the existing roof in order to create a watertight space without affecting or putting any load on the existing structure, keeping everything under the roof line visible from the inside and untouched. All right, and that is all that I had for today. So happy to take any questions or go back and talk about anything further.
Thank you so much, Callie. That was fascinating, particularly that last part about the water, handling all the water and the snow and never impacting the building. That's so cool. Okay, you've got a couple questions regarding the momentary. Did you actually have any budget restraints on the momentary project?
We did actually.
Okay.
Can't get into the
And
details, but yes, there were.
right, understood. Um, were there many client changes on that project?
Yeah, oh, like changing the design, absolutely. And that is the case with all of the projects on the screen right now. Um, that one took place, the momentary took place over the course of about 5 years. And so that gives people time for a lot of changing their minds. The Looking Glass Theater, on the other hand, that one from the time we were hired to the time that it opened was only 13 months. So there just wasn't time for them to keep making changes. So that was actually kind of a nice change from what would be more typical. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And regarding the momentary, is there anything that you wanted to do there but did not complete?
Um, that's a good question because we just went through so many different early iterations, but ultimately I would say no. I had someone in my office who was my kind of partner on the project through schematic design, and then he moved away. So he wasn't involved from the end of schematic design until, the end of the project. And then he actually came back for the grand opening. And he was shocked. He was like, I can't believe you kept all of this in the project. I can't believe it's so similar to how the concept was at the end of SD, which is, again, sometimes unusual. But we were able to keep most of the ideas in the project that we had in the beginning. And I think um, that was successful. And the Quonset hut, the little half round building that's you can see in the photos there, we were able to come back and complete that work a few years later. So that was really the only thing that was kind of outstanding. We did get to come back and do that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Let's see. A couple more questions. Are you ever able to access reconditioned, recycled building components? For example, the blonde brick infill on that Black Box Theater project, were those repurposed bricks?
They're called Chicago Common bricks and they're not made anymore actually. And so we wanted to, like on the front of the building, you see like a blonde face brick. And then, as is very common in the city, the sides and the backs of all the buildings are this, what they call Chicago Common brick that they don't make anymore. So we were able to find some salvaged Chicago Common brick from other structures and purchase that to infill. So it was kind of a consistent look.
Okay, thank you. And loving the detailed views of the lobby and the terrazzo floor. That was really cool. What is the translucent warm panel material that you used inside the lobby?
That is a fiberglass, like a cast fiberglass panel.
Okay, thank you. And you've got other nice comments. Anybody has questions for Callie, you still got a couple minutes to type them in the chat or the Q&A. Callie, from your bio, I was really impressed by all of your volunteer service and work with mentorship programs, but do you have any pieces of advice for young people who want to pursue preservation design?
Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be any different than advice I would give someone pursuing any type of design work. Um, but that would be to really try to find something that you're passionate about. So if that's preservation design, I think that's really awesome. I think that can take a lot of forms. We work with consultants can be very specialized and very specific to, facade preservation or very specialized with a specific material. And then you can also go a lot more general, like I do, for example, and work with all different types of existing buildings, some that are significant and some that aren't. So I think it's just finding whatever your passion is and what your niche is and really not being afraid to just go all in on trying to pursue that. And I think that's the case with any type of design work that you can do.
Thank you. That's great advice. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Thank you all for watching. Oh, wait, here's something. What was the greatest benefit from your career? Oh, from the Rome Studies program. They stuck snow
Um,
in there. Yeah, Rome.
yeah, I think that was my first real international travel experience. I think a lot of people that go through that program maybe don't have prior travel experience. Maybe they do. Maybe it's just me. But I think it's just it opens your mind to seeing different spaces and kind of can pique your curiosity. So while there was so many great things about it, I think that was probably the best part.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for watching. Thank you for the great questions. Callie, we really appreciate you taking time to speak with us today, and we'll see everybody else next month. Thank you.